On today's edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast, we are speaking with a retired PMEA member. But as you'll hear, it doesn't seem like she's really retired because she keeps busy. And there's a lot of things that you can learn from what she has to say and some programs that she has to offer. That's all in today's PMEA's Take Note podcast. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. We are excited today to be talking with a PMEA member, a retired PMEA member, who has certainly kept busy into her retirement. And let's just go ahead and bring her right in right now. Jen Schoener joins us. You probably recognize her from PMEA conferences, PMEA events that she's hosted, but she taught in the Eastern Lancaster County School District. Jen, how many years were you there?
Almost 32.
Okay, almost 32.
Yeah.
And was busy even while she was there outside of her school duties. We'll talk about that and how she's continued a lot of that as well. We're going to be talking all about that today. So Jen, thanks for taking some time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. This is my first podcast, so this is a whole new experience for me. So I'm
Awesome.
excited to be here.
Well, all right. We'll be gentle. I promise. So I love hearing perspectives. So here you are, over 30 years teaching. What are your reflections? What kind of your reflections on your career, and then how it ends in a pandemic?
So when I first started thinking about teaching, it was actually not focusing on music. I thought I was going to be a German teacher, and I was pretty set on that all through high school. Um, and my band director at the time, I was drum major for my high school in my senior year, and back then he would have to go pick up his kids from daycare. And so he would say, "Hey, Jen, can you take the band through this section and this section and this section by the time I get back? And then I want to hear what you did." And I happen to love doing that. I found it fun to just yell in the middle of the football field, "Okay, everybody, bring it in and let's talk about it." And then all my peers would, 100 people would just come in and we'd have this conversation, and then we'd break up and we'd fix it and we work together to make it happen. And I realized that was a whole lot more fun than what I was doing with my German at the time, although I still love German. But that was my hook. And then he realized that I really enjoyed doing rehearsals, and then I would take over the pit orchestra rehearsal in the spring. Um, and that was kind of what got me hooked, as well as all the music festivals that I went to in high school. They looked a little different back then. That was what, the late 80s, where we would actually stay in somebody's home when you were at a district or regional or state festival. And I got the opportunity to have some incredible conductors. Vaclav Bell was one that just really stuck with me, because he brought so much out of the ensemble and got us to listen. And I think just looking at music these days compared to what it was when I first started out, I feel like we teach people to listen more than anything. And I think society is starting to lose its ability to listen,
Mm-hmm.
just overall. And I think that's why music is so important in education. But yeah, so when I went into college, my whole goal was to be a high school band director. That was my dream job. Um, and it took me 3 years and 1 year sabbaticals, in a row to get to that spot where I wanted to be as a full-time high school band director. And it turns out that I was one of the few females in Lancaster County at the time. There weren't, I don't think, any female band directors when I first started. And that was a whole nother world as a female. For instance, my interview for the position, the principal at the time that I interviewed with, he asked me, say you had a really hard day, and say the kids just weren't playing what you wanted them to, and they just weren't behaving correctly, what would you do? And I said, well, I'd go back and I'd look at it and think about, how could I do this differently tomorrow? And, He's like, "But no, what would you really do? Like, it's terrible. The band sound they're making all the mistakes." And I'm thinking in my head, "I'd probably have an adult beverage, but I'm pretty sure I can't say that in my interview." Like, so I just kinda reiterated what I said before. I'm like, "I I would reevaluate it." And he said, "But would you cry?" And I thought, "Well, that's an interesting question because I don't think you'd ask the other guy who was just in here for the interview
Yeah.
if he would cry." So, it was very different back then. Um, and I feel like, female band directing has come a long way since then, but I loved every minute of it. Um, and so I was at high school level for 9 years, and then I met my husband, Brad, and that's when we got married, and I managed to switch to elementary when there was an opening, because I was otherwise never home. When you do high school band, you pretty much live it, and you live at school, so that's how I got into the elementary, and Brad was elementary, um, and that's how we got started into it.
So, I didn't know the some pieces of that backstory, so that's interesting. Um, so just curious, as you look back then, having done high school and having done elementary, I mean, is
Mhm.
there a preference that you had, in hindsight?
So when I not only did high school, but I also did middle school at the same time, because the 2 buildings were attached, so I would, do both organizations. And honestly, like, when I switched to elementary, they're just little high school kids. Everybody loses their music, nobody knows where their reeds are. Like, it's really to me, it wasn't that different. They were just bigger and smaller, and you could have a little more of a, involved conversation with high school kids, but when you hand out a music folder to a 4th grader, it's like Christmas. And when you
Right.
hand it to a high school kid, it's like, "Oh, here we go. Here's another music folder." So, I mean, those were the differences that I saw, but I love them as long as they're holding an instrument, I'm fine. Like, I
Yeah.
love I love all of them. So,
Oh, I love that. That's cool. All right, so let's kind of fast forward a little in your career, and you decide to retire
mhm.
while we're in a pandemic. So, what was life like for you teaching as the pandemic was starting, and then saying, "Okay, now's the time to retire"? I mean, I don't know if it was the pandemic that caused that, or walk us through that a little bit.
So, well, when my late husband, Brad, passed away in 2009, and that really changed my life drastically. Because I was one of those people that before he passed away, we had all these plans, and we're gonna tour Europe, and we're gonna have our own music school, and we're gonna, have all these great things ahead. And then when that kind of fell apart, I had to figure out what I was doing now. Um, and so after he passed, we started the Brad Shaner Fund with the Upper Darby Arts and Education Foundation, and that became my second job. Basically, I was a part-time job, and I started with as a volunteer, and then eventually became executive director and kind of moved into that spot. And we were doing summer programs prior to COVID, um, uh, and just it was growing, and I loved it, and it was a great outlet because I still got to work with amazing music teachers, and the fun part was that we could change the curriculum if we didn't like it, or we didn't have to do the same thing over and over again. If it wasn't working, okay, just don't do that again. We'll fix it and we'll do something different. So that was a very good outlet. What was funny was, like 2 weeks before COVID in 2020. Um, I think I posted something on my Facebook page like, "Okay, just stop the world. I need to just have 2 weeks." And then literally that Friday, I'm telling my beginner band, "Okay, guys, I just heard on the radio on my way here that we're not coming back on Monday, and we don't know when we'll be back." So we had this 2 weeks of
So
literally the world.
you're like a fortune teller then? Is that what?
I'm not responsible for the whole pandemic. I won't take that responsibility. But it was funny because, like, those 2 weeks, I finally had a chance to sit down at the piano and
Mm,
play, and not it wasn't working for a performance, and it wasn't working for an assignment. It was because I just wanted to play. And then, I got out all my music software and equipment, and like, oh my gosh, I can actually have time to sit at my keyboard. Meanwhile, the rest of the world's trying to figure out what it's doing. Um, but I think people started to figure out why we have the arts and how it fits. And I was really excited because, and me being at this point, a teacher that was at 30 years, and I'm 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 okay on technology, but I'm not the fastest. But I felt like, you know what? Okay, the pandemic gave us a little push, and anything we weren't doing that was 21st century, now all of a sudden we had to. So I felt, for me personally, that was a good thing. Um, we had to operate all our summer camps virtually, and none of us had ever been on a Zoom call. None of us had
Mm.
any idea about how, that would operate. And, so we had 60 kids, and I think it was 20 different teachers over a 4-week period, and we were on Zoom every day, and that was even before school started. Um, so we had, like, basically lots of professional development that we weren't even
Yeah.
we didn't realize we were gonna get. Um, but once we turned off that switch, then people didn't wanna look at the screen anymore, and they wanted to spend time with their families, and they wanted to play more, or, do something that was not plugged in. Um, and I felt like, "Oh my gosh, this is gonna be really good for music," because people have had that chance to see what it's like, to be able to turn a screen off. Um, so that I thought that was a good sign when we were
Mhm.
back in 2020. Um, but I think what I've seen since then, I feel like the hybrid model that I know my district did for a period of time, and I think some districts are still continuing. Um, as a teacher, it was hard to pull off the hybrid model, because you needed either everything is virtual and you can focus on that, or everything is in person and you can focus on that. But to have all of the stars align and get everything perfectly in place to be able to teach kids in front of you and online at the same time, that's extremely difficult. And especially when you're teaching instruments, and especially when you're teaching young kids instruments. Um, I found that very, very difficult. Um, and I feel like there were a lot of politics coming into the classroom that really had nothing to do with the kids. It was more of adults having an opinion. Um, and I felt like it was more about winning rather than listening.
Mhm.
Um, so those were the good and the bad that I saw coming in and out of the pandemic. And when I decided to retire in August of 2021, um, it the foundation that I worked for at the time, they were going through some major changes. We adopted Upper Darby Summer Stage, or the foundation, I should say, adopted Upper Darby Summer Stage, which was a big undertaking. And at the time, they said, "Hey, would you want to come on with us full time?" And I had already, invested a lot of my heart into the Music Man programs. So that was that was a decision that was tough, but I think I made the right decision for me anyway at the time, because I can still work with kids and music teachers, and have a lot of good influence on the community. But I'm also not driving 4 hours a day, which is what I was doing before, going from Lancaster to Westchester to Upper Darby and back. It was a lot. So
So kind of good fortuitous timing, actually,
exactly.
when you look at it. So we're going to
Hmm.
talk a little bit more in a bit about that work that you're doing with the foundation. But
Hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about, because I love to talk to people who have seen a lot of changes in music education and education. We hear the buzzwords that happen every few years of what's, I'm sure you've been through all of them: outcome based education, block scheduling, right? Every district went through the phase. And but then there's been phases of music education. You talked a little bit about that. So I'm just curious for some maybe some pointed reflection then on, like, what were the good and the bad changes you've seen just in music education in general over the span of your career.
I think the good and the bad. So I feel like as music teachers, we're too good at what we do. And by that, I mean, everybody looks at our end product. I mean, over the years, I've had administrators come and they'll observe me at my concert, and which is nice of them because I want them to come to the concert, but I never felt like they were seeing how we got there. Um, and I feel like, the more we can show people the process of how we get kids to that performance point, I think that's what people need to see us do. A lot of people have said, well, you have 300 kids at a time. How do you handle discipline, or how do you make them listen to you? Um, and I feel like that's what we need to show administration, how we do it, because I think a lot of music teachers also go into administration, and that's because they have to handle large groups. That's because we have to handle um, big group decisions. And if you make it a group decision for 300 of them, you got to make sure they all follow it. And then sometimes you have to call out one for not following along, and then the rest of them start to get the idea. Um, I feel like that's important, and people don't realize, like, oh, well, you're just in your little room with two kids at a time, and how could you possibly know what to do, other than one on one, or and even one on one these days doesn't, I don't think, happens very often
Right.
anymore. But that's how I started. I had my first year of teaching elementary. There were 40 kids in the whole program in the district, um, and then in 3 years it went up to 350. So
Wow.
that was fun. That was fun. I enjoyed recruiting. And the other thing I think that a lot of music educators need to understand, and is that you have to know your audience. And by that I mean, um, you have to know the parents that you work with. They might have a completely different perception about what your vision should be for your program. And you have to know how they're going to be the ones to support you no matter what. And so you have to find that middle ground, and figure out how you can work with them, um, for the better of the program, and for what's good for the kids. um, and same thing if you're in the office with the principal, who is mostly has an athletic history, and really doesn't understand what you do, or how you do it. He just wants to make sure there's a lot of kids on that football field. um, so you have to know your audience, and you have to know how to play to your audience. um, I think for young music educators starting out, those are things that I would definitely talk to them about, and I've worked with a lot of student teachers on that. That, and just overall music educators, we are the only thing in school really that teaches kids how to listen, and I feel more and more that's just crucial to our society. Um, and whether you're listening to the person next to you, and then you have to listen to your section, and then you have to listen to the whole ensemble, and then you have to listen and watch the conductor, and get his or her portrayal of what they're trying to get you to do. There's so many things that put you in a situation where you need to be able to just take it all in and understand it, and then give back to it. um, so I feel like that, as music educators, we need more and more to get that perspective to the rest of the world.
That's really interesting. I love this concept of, yeah, it is the only thing that talks about, that really focuses on listening.
Mhm.
And that's a really interesting thing that I don't think a lot of music educators have captured on that, because that's an advocacy talking point in a lot of ways. Um, but I just love the other point that you make about knowing your audience, because what a music teacher does in knowing your audience, when you're presenting what you do to the student, the parent, a fellow teacher, community member, principal, whatever, the you need to have different perspectives in all of those things. And those are the things that we talk about in the advocacy world too, of, okay, if I'm going to go to advocate for something, I'm not just going to walk in and say music is good, see you later. I'm going to go in and say, okay, what is this person's position?
Mhm.
And so I'm knowing my audience, and what can they do for me, by me showing what I can do for them, or just showing the value of in our case, what we're doing for students. So that is a huge advocacy lesson, because advocacy is not always working from a deficit, right? It's
Right.
I mean, the things you're talking about are, you're telling the positive stories all along the way, uh, to, and you know your audience as you're doing it, because just by saying, look, I can manage a program of 350 kids, and let's throw on that, oh, and they're all holding instruments that they're not all the same to play the instruments, so I have to teach them all that. um, Diversified instruction, right? Another
Mhm.
phase we've heard about in education that music has been doing forever. So I think that's a really important point just to stress. Knowing your audience is so crucial.
Well, that and also we're one of the few places I feel that it's like a safe zone for kids where it's okay to make mistakes, and literally, like, over my career, I'm pretty sure I've heard millions of them, literally,
Yeah.
and then it's our job to take those mistakes and turn it into, like, a masterpiece.
Yeah.
It's a performance, and, it's okay to make mistakes in math, but then, of course, then here comes the test, and then, no mistakes, no mistakes, and the kids are I later in my teaching career, kids seem more and more afraid to make mistakes, and that it's not okay to make a mistake, and I feel like we're starting to lose the part that's they're human. Like, you're gonna make a mistake. Should you make the same one twice? Well, no, the goal is not to do that, but you might,
Yeah.
and it's how you handle that. And do you just give up and you're like, oh, I'll never get it, or are you just going to say, okay, all right, I'm going to try 10 more times, and am I going to think about each time, or just going to blindly try 10 more times and make the same mistake 10 more times? Like, you have to think about it. There's a whole process, and I feel
That's
like that's why we're here. That's why music teachers do what they do. I mean, we need to help with that process.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting point I hadn't thought about. Like, we should embrace the making the mistakes in everything because that's how you learn. And music has always done that. Again, something we're already doing that other subject areas are trying to figure out, or maybe doing something in the wrong way. I mean, I come from the competitive marching band world, and I talk about that a lot. And one of the things that we would always talk about with students is, okay, if you make a mistake, it's the recovery that's important. You're not going to make a mistake and just stand there, right? You're going to make the
Right.
mistake and you're going to recover from it, because that shows something actually to a judge, to say, okay, this there's comprehension there, there's understanding of a mistake, and how do I recover and move out of it. Which then is certainly something that should be transferable to other subject areas, to your point. But it's interesting that you observe that maybe it isn't, because there's too much drilling of, you got to get it right, and don't make a mistake because you have to get it right on the test.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And from going from teaching high school to teaching elementary, um, especially, because I did elementary the majority of my career, and even middle school, like, you just have to give kids a safe place. And that's what I feel like we're kind of losing that in some ways. I mean, because I know there were so many scheduling conflicts, or they had to prepare for this test, or they had to do this, and then you cut everything short, or you juggle and you pile three lessons on top of each other so you can fit everybody in the day that needs to have a lesson, but yet it's really not, you're gonna have mixed levels, or you have mixed instruments, and it, we're trying to just still do all of our quality teaching, but not have the same quality time, I guess,
Right.
is what I'm
Right.
looking for. Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting perspectives of a career. I appreciate it. We could probably talk for hours further on that. So we'll do that at the next conference. We'll sit down and
Okay.
have a chat. I
Sure.
love hearing about this, but we really want to talk about the work that you're doing with the Upper Darby Arts and Education Foundation. You described a little bit of your roles before.
Mhm.
But let's take a little bit of a deeper dive to, tell us about that. And I know you're going to show us some stuff from that too. So
Mhm.
just tell us about what it is, the work you're doing.
So this, I can't really take credit for any of this, because my late husband, Brad Schoener, he was the one that came up with the idea, um, eh, before he passed away from cancer in 2009. He decided, and he told me, he doesn't want to be remembered for his cancer. He wants to be remembered for his love of kids and his love for music. And so 2 months before his passing, he set up the Brad Schoener Memorial Fund under the Upper Darby Arts and Education Foundation. And his goal was to give kids every opportunity, regardless of their socioeconomic status, um, regardless of their ability levels. If they had a desire to try an instrument, to learn about an instrument, he wanted to be able to make that happen. Particular for the kids in the Upper Darby School District, because that's where he taught for 25 years. Um, and the big thing that he left me with, that I hear in my head every time I sit down to work on this project, is he kept saying to me, "I'm not done yet." So that's that's a that's a big goal for me, is to keep his wishes alive. And so since 2009, we started off, and we were able to start donating instruments to kids to keep them playing, or if they couldn't afford one. And then next, we started giving out scholarships to kids. And if the teachers in the district identified kids as having, some talent and stick to itiveness that we were looking for, that, they were going to practice and would really benefit from private lesson study, then we would provide them with scholarships. And then quite by accident, in 2012, I got a call from Philly's Charities, and they said, "Hey, we hear you have this goal for your music fund. You know, we would like to give you a grant to go forward." And the third goal of Brad's was to have an elementary music camp for the summer, which became the Music Man Camp, which is now celebrating its 10th anniversary, which is awesome. Um, and then, the township got involved and helped raise money and contributed and kept our programs going. And now it's really turned into like a 7-week Music Man Academy. And we have offerings for kids, whether they're special needs students, whether they are high school kids. We have an apprentice program to keep them involved once they age out. And then all of our camps are based on elementary and middle school kids, because there were many high school music camps in the area, but very few focused on elementary kids, and that's where Brad's heart was. So all of our programs are based on elementary, middle school.
Fascinating. Okay, so I know you want to show us a little bit
Mhm.
of what's happening in some of these, and that's really fascinating to me that you mentioned. I didn't realize that it was just elementary, middle school.
Mhm.
And again, like that's so smart, right? Because there are so many camps out there for high school kids, and so this is providing then some opportunity for different kids. I love this. You know what? I'm so glad I know you. Like, I just feel smarter knowing you. Because like you've enlightened me on several things today already, just like
Uh-huh.
different perspectives. And I think that is so important that we all listen for a different perspective. The listening thing, and just here we're going to do this camp, but we're going to do it in this way to reach the kids who we're not particularly reaching. So, we'd love to see some things from this.
Sure,
So
sure, absolutely. So, yeah. So I just should preface this with, the other thing that I should say about Brad is that he was kind of an extraordinary person, in that he didn't want this to be a typical music camp. So normally you go to music camp, and you're going to have your individual lesson, you're going to play in your section, you're going to have an ensemble rehearsal. We do all that, but we also have a little bit of Brad put into it. So, one quick story I will tell about him is that when he met my high school trumpet section, we were dating, and he would come up and help with my high school band. And I look over and I see Brad, and he's on his head, literally with his feet up against the football shed, and he's upside down, and he has his trumpet up to his mouth, and he's playing like high C's. And I'm like, "What are you doing? Why are you what?" Like, I'm trying to have a rehearsal. And he bet my trumpet section, this is the first day they met him, he bet them that he could stand on his head and do high Cs, because he didn't think they were putting enough air through their instrument. So
uh,
he was demonstrating how. And, like, this is the kind of thing, like, he wasn't a normal person. So everything that we do at camp, we do just a little not normal, because that's how Brad would have wanted it. So
yeah.
this just to preface our camps that way.
Yeah, and I
So
think that's so well, that's cool because that's totally engaging kids
Mhm.
while teaching, while showing them, Like, I mean, to his point, look what I can do, guys. So come
There
on.
would have been probably easier ways to do that,
Well,
but
that's probably true, but
but none nearly as entertaining.
yeah,
So,
exactly. Right.
all right. So let me try and see if I can get this to work. My
Yeah,
screen.
we're
Let's see
going to
here.
see some pictures of the programs that you offer, which I just think is there's a diverse amount of programs. It's fascinating to see, and I'm also while you're pulling this up here. Let me ask one question. I like talk about attendance at these things. I mean, are you filling up the camp? Let's talk pre-pandemic, I guess, because pandemic's a
Pre
little strange.
Pre-pandemic, we were thriving. So our Music Man camp, um, and I can kind of talk you through as we go here. But we have
Okay,
right
so
now.
we have the slides up, so
Um,
go for it.
okay, great. So this is a shot from our Music Man camp. Pre-pandemic, we would typically have 85 students at Beverly Hills Middle School in Upper Darby, and this is not just Upper Darby School District kids. This is a kind of a mixture of kids from Upper Darby, but also from the surrounding school districts. The We have greenies on our staff, so you'll see Jake, our greenie, standing in the background there. Jake is an Upper Darby grad who is now a Westchester University music major, and former Music Man camper. So once the campers age out, because they can go from fourth grade to eighth grade, once they age out, then they can come back and help as a volunteer, and then they become an assistant greenie, and then they gradually work their way up. And actually, Jake this year is going to be one of our lead teachers for camp, which is awesome. So
Mm.
it's a really cool apprentice program that we have for all of our camp participants. Wait a minute. There we go. So the Schoener Fund with Upper Darby Arts and Education Foundation, these were Brad's three wishes for kids in the Upper Darby School District. And so far, we've provided over 600 instruments to kids that can't afford them. We've provided almost $10,000 in lessons for kids who needed scholarships. That's not including our scholarships that we give for the camps themselves. And then the Music Man camp was the initial summer music camp, but now it's grown into a whole academy of different offerings. These are just some pictures of what it's like to come to Music Man camp. We, as you can see, don't just play our instruments. We have a drumming circle every other day. You can see them all lying on the floor. That looks a little weird, but that's actually part of our relaxation and breathing techniques that we do with them in the mornings to kind of get them warmed up and going. We have harmonic classes. So whether that's on keyboard or you can start on ukulele and then work your way up through your years as a camper, you can do guitar one and guitar two as you get more advanced. We've had different master classes and performances from local performers. The steel drum picture was from a few years ago, but the kids absolutely loved it because they got a chance to figure out how in the world the steel drum works. And we actually have a camper who was from Trinidad who played steel drum, and he became like the hero of the camp because he came in and performed for them on his own steel drum, and it was awesome. The kids loved it. So we're trying to give them unique opportunities. This year for our master classes, we're actually having a harpist come in who's an Upper Darby grad and also a Westchester music education major. So we'll have a harp performance in a clinic, and then we'll also have Snack Time Philly come in and play. They're the halftime show for the 76ers, and also a lot of them happen to be Upper Darby alums. So they're going to come and perform for our campers. And then we also have what we call our celebrity guest clinicians who come every year. Al Ches, who was the lead trumpet player for Tower of Power and played for David Letterman for many, many years. He's been our brass guest clinician for I think the past 6 years. He's like a Music Man family member now. And then we've also welcomed Ryan Joseph, who's the fiddler for Alan Jackson. And he's also the department chair for Belmont University down in Nashville. And
And
he,
from Pennsylvania, from my neck of the woods.
yes, and actually an original Pittsburgh person.
Yeah.
Yes, yep. So Ryan is amazing, and so he comes and works with our string kids while Al is working with the band kids, and they both have just been a huge addition to our music band camp. The Jazz Jam Camp, we started, this will be our third one that we can do in person. Heroy Turf is a former student of Brad's, grew up, had Brad when he was a fifth grader. And Brad was very good at teaching elementary kids how to play jazz. They were fearless, like they weren't afraid to improvise. They understood modes, things that I was under the impression, because I was classically trained flute player. I was taught, well, flutes flutes don't play jazz that much. That's more advanced. You have to have, a certain level before you start into the theory of it. And here, here these kids Brad had as students are undertaking things that are just incredible. And the cool thing is that Heroy knows how Brad taught him, so it's kind of like having a little bit of Brad in our camp, because he's using the same methods. And also, Emmanuel Wilkins, who just won like Jazz Artist of the Year and Album of the Year for 2021, I believe. They're all saxophonists for some reason, which is kind of funny because Brad was a trumpet player. But we have a lot of really successful alumni that had Brad as fifth graders and as elementary kids. So the Jazz Jam camp is kind of a spin-off of the Music Man camp, but it's meant to really stretch kids and give them an outlet where they can just experiment with as many notes as they want. And they learn different styles, funk, jazz, or funk, swing, and ballads. And we also bring in local Philly musicians to play and also give master classes as well. So that's going to be happening the week of July 11th is coming up.
Yeah.
This is our Butterfly Buddy Camp. So this is our special needs camp, thanks to a grant from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. That was a COVID surprise. I got an email out of the blue during COVID 2020, and it says, your check will be coming soon. And I was like, I thought it was spam, and it wasn't. It was it was $100,000. And they said, hey, we're going to give it to you now. And I said, but it's COVID and I can't have camp yet. So what we're doing is we're kind of coming out of COVID, and we operated at 50% last summer, but now we're back in full swing. We had this program in the Upper Darby libraries this past spring, and it combines music educators, music therapists, art educators, and dance or art therapists and dance therapists.
Okay.
And the buddy concept are high school volunteers who come in and they do everything along with their camp buddy, whether that's playing ukulele, whether that's moving around dancing, whether that's working on a project together. And it's about building interactions, not just between the buddy and the camper, but also between the campers as well. We've had kids with autism, we've had kids with Down syndrome, so many varying disabilities, but it's wonderful to see how encouraging and how patient these kids are with each other. And it's a safe space for kids, which is what we want to have.
Right.
And hopefully you're not hearing that lawnmower that just started in my backyard. Okay, that's awesome. It's really loud here. Okay. So these are our stay in shape lessons, which we offer. We half-hour lessons twice a week throughout the summer for kids to just kind of keep their fingers going. And then basically what's next, I would love to do more work in the community itself, and work with the local nonprofits. We started an Upper Darby collaborative of nonprofits this past year, including libraries and the YMCA, the Rotary, the different food distribution centers on 69th Street in that local area. And we're all kind of working together to bring more to the community through the community. So that's our next big project coming up.
All right. Well, and so the website's on there, so folks can go and take a look at that. And so is this only for Upper Darby students? Is this for anyone in the area? How's this work?
We are open to everyone in the area.
Awesome.
Yes, absolutely. And we encourage, we have a lot of amazing staff members that I think, Mike Marguerite, Tim Blessington, they're going to be working with Rory Turf, Dr. Steve Selfridge of his Dr. Selfridge YouTube channel. These guys have worked with young kids for their entire careers, and they understand kids that are young. Because that's the biggest challenge I've had, is that we have a lot of talented people, but they don't always bring it down to an elementary level, which is different.
Yeah.
So that's very important to have that aspect of the camps.
Well, fascinating, and I'm so glad you're not bored in retirement, because
Not bored.
you're obviously not. I know as we've talked a little bit, I mean, your schedule is full. Trying to find times to record this and just to chat. I mean, your schedule's full, which is awesome, because you're the type of person who I can't see sitting still, and I'm glad you're not, because you're doing so much good for music education and for kids.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I love it. I love every minute, and the more we can create and the more kids we can get involved, the better.
Great. Well, folks, if you see Jen at a future PMEA conference, this is someone you want to pull aside and have a chat with, and because this is the person we want to replicate. This is someone we want young music educators to see, and because you're passionate, and that's so crucial to any career, but certainly music education. So, Jen, thanks for taking some time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
And thank you all for joining us on this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast, presented by the Slippery Rock University Music Department. We'll see you next time.